All right, folks, let's do the video on the full moon lunar eclipse in Sagittarius tomorrow, June the 5th at 12:13 p.m. according to me, but 12:12 according to many people. It might be 12:12. It doesn't matter. It's a difference of a minute. There's something nice about 12:12. The full moon occurs at around 12:12 or 12:13 p.m. tomorrow, and then the eclipse is a few minutes after that. So here we are, the first of the three eclipses of the late spring, summer. And let's draw it up for you and let's talk through what this eclipse entails. At the time of the eclipse, the sun is in Gemini, the moon is in Sagittarius. The sun has just met up with Venus as a retrograde Venus as of 2 or 3 days ago, and the sun and the moon are squared by Mars, which is getting closer and closer to Neptune and Pisces. As far as the eclipse itself is concerned, the week before and after April the 5th of this year would be important. Clearly the week before and after June the 5th become important. And indeed, with a full moon and with this eclipse, really the time between April the 4th technically and the next new moon, which is on June the 21st. This particular full moon and its impact and whatever it is that it's trying to convey to us remains active till June the 21st. Now, this is the first of the eclipses, as I've expressed lots of times in the recent videos to you, in the Gemini-Sagittarius, on the Gemini-Sagittarius axis. And the last time we had eclipses on the Gemini-Sagittarius axis were between December 1991 and May 1994. I'm going back 2 sets of eclipses here. So December 1991 to May 1994, and then December 2001 to November 2003. December 2001 and November 2003. Now these are both of these that I gave you are sort of 2-year spans of eclipses. This particular span of Gemini Sagittarius eclipses runs between June 2020, which is where we are right now, and December 2021. So as I've expressed in previous videos, these eclipses really are going to play out over the next year and a half, and then we're done. So it's a much more compact set, you know, a difference of 6 months is a fair amount eclipse time. These eclipses in Gemini Sagittarius, they're going to move through relatively swiftly, and there's nothing, don't feel sad about that. You know, sometimes eclipses will take 2 years to run their course, or a little bit longer even, but a year and a half's span of eclipses on a certain axis is quick, but still important enough. In some regards, the most important planet currently with this eclipse is a retrograde Venus. Now, being retrograde suits Venus in a way that being retrograde does not suit Mercury or Mars. Mercury and Mars are both relatively yang planets. They're out there to do, they're out there to achieve, they're forward moving, whereas Venus, being the feminine planet and the planet that governs a certain amount of relaxation and flow, natural flow, divine flow, letting things happen based on divine intelligence, encoded intelligence, as opposed to Mercury, which is about the mind and communication and cognition, and Mars, which is about action, both Mercury and Mars trying to control and manage the environment around us, whereas with Venus, it's about sitting back. A retrograde Venus is a little bit more relaxed, much more relaxed actually than a retrograde Mars and Mercury, when those planets are really out of their element during that time. And the purpose of this retrograde Venus, or indeed any retrograde Venus, as I've mentioned a number of times in my previous videos, is for us to reevaluate particularly finances and relationships. Through the lens of really getting back in touch with what it is that we value, what is important to us, where it is that we think we're going, and whether our financial lives and our relationship lives are aligned with where it is that we're going. Some of this is a reevaluation of actions and decisions made by others that we've had less control over, or maybe more control in retrospect than we thought, and as a result of which their decisions or evaluations or a watchfulness around what we value and how things have played out and how we feel about it at this particular time. And some of it is about reevaluating our own decisions with regard to who we've been in bed with. However you want to take that, with Venus and indeed with the Mars, which is squared Venus recently. You know, you can't take the romantic or the sexual side of relationships out of the equation. But it's not just the romantic side of relationships, it's all relationships. So there's a question about being watchful and reviewing and reevaluating relationships and finances. This has been going on since, in some ways, this has been going on since early April, but it really has been going on, the retrograde has been going on since May the 13th, and Venus turns direct on June the 25th and remains in Gemini till August the 7th. So this theme of, and it's not, the primary purpose is reevaluating relationships. That can also be themes of, this is tied to the theme of reevaluating past relationships, people from your past, things that they have done, things that have happened, getting a sense of them. And then outside of that, there's also the possibility of artistic and creative and Venusian luxury, beauty, art, relationships coming up from the past in a certain sense to be reevaluated or completed as well. As I've said before, the eclipses are not playing out negatively for everyone. For some people, they can be overwhelmingly positive. And for other people, where change is in the offing and things or situations need to be eclipsed from our lives, they are more challenging. As I've mentioned tons of times before, eclipses can be a time when the proportion of people transitioning or dying increases, or the information around terminal processes, illnesses, things that cannot be avoided, also become a lot more present. The eclipses, especially since the new moon in Gemini now 2 weeks ago, it really has made it quite clear as to how they're playing out on a national basis, and I'm referring to the United States here because that's where I'm currently living. What are our values? What do we value? And with a full moon lunar eclipse, things being revealed, the disk of the moon becomes revealed. With a full moon, and indeed with the lunar eclipse, you could be pushed into the limelight, or certain issues or situations can come to a head or be pushed into a limelight. Full moons, and particularly eclipses, are emotional. The cup runneth over, the milk comes to a boil and spills over. There can be emotional meltdowns, tantrums, and certainly when we consider the chart of the United States of America, this is a tantrum full moon. The United States has a Sagittarius ascendant. So the first house is Sagittarius. It stands for the United States. And the seventh house, where Venus is retrograde, is the seventh house of partnerships and the other party, marriage, who we are contracted to. And with this full moon, when you have a full moon in the first house, so this would apply to anyone with the Sagittarius ascendant, sometimes it can be issues related to health that come to the fore. Sometimes you can be pushed into the limelight between April the 5th and June the 5th, heading towards that times. But very often it is a tantrum. Very often it is a meltdown. Very often it has to do with the assertion of boundaries of full moon in the first house, where certain things have been allowed to go on for a long time, and the client has suffered and suffered and suffered, and then around the full moon, in this case an eclipse, people may behave badly in order to assert themselves, or people may express themselves in calculated, strategic, emotional, political ways in order to readdress those boundaries. And here we are. So as we head towards this full moon tomorrow, a couple of things have happened. On June the 3rd, the sun and the moon being opposite each other, on June the 3rd, yesterday, a retrograde Venus met up with the sun, and at the time of the full moon, they're going to be separating, but only slightly. As the full moon lunar eclipse happens, the moon will oppose Venus. When Venus is retrograde and burns through or comes through the sun, it's a kind of a rebirth of Venus. Venus this time is, I believe, reborn as the morning star. And certain interpretations of Venus being reborn as the morning star makes Venus more combative, sort of the mother goddess, the more armed and militaristic version of the Mother Goddess as opposed to the more peaceful version of the Mother Goddess in some regards. We'll see how that plays out and what that looks like. But more importantly, as we head to this full moon, certain things have occurred where we have realized what we need to with regard to our relationships and possibly our financial situation. Certain things have come to the fore, certain things are undeniable, certain things have maybe even come to some sort of completion, and that in itself has revealed something. Sorry, I do these outside stubbornly. I refuse to do them inside because I'm nutty that way. And then we have garbage trucks and barbecues that neighbors have and music playing and bees that interrupt readings and all sorts of other events that happen. But I kind of like the greenery around where I am currently living. I just really find it peaceful and restful and a nice way to be able to do these readings. So retrograde Venus burning itself off and being reborn as of yesterday, just around clarity. Now, as I've mentioned before, Venus retrograde, as with retrogrades in general, is not the best of times to be making decisions. It's a time of review. So by all means, if there are financial decisions that are going to be beneficial to you, things to cut out that you want to move ahead with, you're welcome, do what is right for you. And no one is saying that you should be in relationships that are wrong for you or that are abusive or violent. So if you need to seek help for with any of that, do not use astrology to keep yourself in harm's way, okay? But from a more general perspective, Venus goes direct on June the 25th, and it would be the time after that, but particularly because Mercury will be retrograde at that time, Mercury goes direct around July the 13th. I'm really looking at, the second half of July as a time to reach some sort of culmination or decisions around how things go. Really, this kind of turmoil, eclipsy period that we're in doesn't leave us till about August the 20th. But from the middle of July to the end of July to August the 20th, the energy starts to dissipate. We're finishing off the rinse cycle, and the washer dryer that we're in starts to slow down and starts to reach its end, and the water starts to be drained, starting about the end of July, the second half of July, progressively by the 20th of July or so onwards towards August the 20th. So certain things may well have reached their revelation or a certain amount of clarity, whether we wanted it or not, clarity that we desired or not, laurels handed to us or not, by the time of this full moon, have been going since April the 5th. I've already mentioned to you dates of prior eclipses to think about themes that were active during that time. If you know where Sagittarius and Gemini are in your chart, what houses they occupy and what they stand for, that's going to help you enormously. It's a new set of areas of focus. The eclipses of leaning into are in Gemini. The eclipses of release are in Sagittarius. This eclipse is an eclipse of releasing something that we might be holding on to or be extraordinarily attached to, but is no longer serving us. Also, Venus squared Mars on July the 2nd, just before it met up with the Sun. So, as I said, things from a relationship perspective or the things from a reevaluation perspective that had a conflict element to them that needed to be revealed or come to a head already have done so prior to this full moon. A lot of I'm no longer holding back in my readings. Those of you who watched yesterday's reading about the Mars-Neptune conjunction, which is playing an important role within this eclipse, know my experience with the Gemini new moon, and now whatever I feel instinctively with regard to looking at a chart and what it seems to be revealing, I'm going to convey to you. So if it resonates, great. These are general readings. If they don't, make note of it and move on. There are lots of different, well, not lots, but there are different interpretations of some of this kind of stuff to consider with regard to how these transits may be playing out. It's still a narrow set of boundaries, but there are different ways in which things can play out. Now, when we consider this particular full moon in Sagittarius, the full moon is ruled by the planet Jupiter because it's in Sagittarius. Jupiter is Capricorn, so Jupiter is being disposited by Saturn, which is in Aquarius. And Saturn in Aquarius is in its own sign of Aquarius, but also disposited by Uranus, which is in Taurus, ruled by Venus. Here we go again, a retrograde Venus, but Venus is in Gemini. ruled by Mercury. Mercury is now in Cancer. The nature of the communication has become much less about information and much more emotional, much more nurturing, much more protective. Remember, the United States has its sun in Sagittarius, so a lot of communication, at least politically, about core and values and what needs to be protected. It's something that plays out in terms of communication on all sides of the fence with regard to what different people are trying to protect. It is a full moon of conflict. I'm going from the micro to the macro on this numerous times in this recording, so just know that. Because when it comes to the first house and the seventh house, that plane of marriage and contracts and legal affairs and legalities is a plane of conflict. And Mercury is in Cancer, so we're back to Cancer being ruled by the moon. So one of the dispositors of this chart is Saturn. Rules, discipline, formality, authority, consequence, karma. And Saturn is retrograde, so a need to re-look at discipline and boundaries and what constitutes order and what does not. What are the rules that we choose to play with in this 3D reality? If Saturn was direct, it would have a much more conservative interpretation. For me, Saturn being retrograde means it's time to look at laws and rules and discipline and structure and what constitutes good behavior and the right karmic response needing to be reevaluated to some extent. And Saturn being disposited by Uranus, epiphanies, information, technology, news, by a retrograde Venus, relooking at our boundaries, by communication that is now much more emotional, much more protective, much more nurturing, and back to the full moon. I don't think I need to say more about the rulership of this chart. I think it speaks for itself. And the question is, how does it apply to you? And somewhere in this entire process, you can also ask yourself how it is that Jupiter, the ruler of this chart, the god of gods, faith, truth, your authenticity, luck, some would say, good fortune. I would say, I really would Jupiter come back to sort of the fundamental spiritual truth, being currently disposited by Saturn in your life in terms of rules and what is right behavior, what role technology and information and epiphanies are currently playing in your life in terms of how they're playing a role in you reevaluating your financial affairs and your relationship affairs, how that is somehow being managed and controlled by communication and cognition that is much more emotional and protective of you, sort of the communication aspect playing the role of the mother, how it is that you choose to mother yourself and protect yourself, and outside of that, the disk of the moon being revealed, both on the micro and the macro levels. See how that plays for you currently. The full moon is squared by Mars conjuncting Neptune. I did a separate video on Mars conjunct Neptune yesterday, and there are various interpretations of Mars conjunct Neptune. Mars, the planet of conflict and going after what we want, perhaps working towards spiritual ideals of oneness and community and a lack of distinction between concepts of the self and ego and false distinctions between people. We are seeing that. Mars conjunct Neptune, for certain people, heightened creativity, the arts, inspiration, inspiration especially, the arts, heightened attraction, sexual attraction, romantic attraction, a need to be a little careful with regard to smoke and mirrors and what is true and what is not true. And then especially with regard to Mars conjunct Neptune being a sign of underhanded conflict, whether through gaslighting, falseness, lying, deception, kind of playing a role here as well, and playing a very active role in this throwdown between a need for conflict and standing up for oneself and going after what one wants and setting of boundaries, but perhaps in a certain sense having to do it, choosing to do it, or having to combat underhanded behavior in others, gaslighty behavior, false behavior in others, and that having a direct impact on this reevaluation of relationships and financial affairs. that is exaggerated and brought to some sort of revelation at the time of this full moon lunar eclipse, wherever it is that it is occurring. There's no question in my mind, as I think of all my clients, that it is occurring somewhere. Now we come to the heart of the matter, okay? Now let me just tell you about what this eclipse means to me. There are stories that we tell ourselves, and there are stories that other people tell us, and there is the truth. And this particular full moon, which has the Sun and a Venus retrograde, until very recently a Mercury in Gemini. Gemini being a sign of news and information and stories and chatter and talking and the fray and the community and where we live, information, interaction, being present to the community around you. And Sagittarius being a sign of remove, of authenticity, of aloofness, of spirituality, of your connection with God and spirit. Pisces is playing an important part in this insofar as it's squared as well. And friendly reminder, crises from late 2015 and 2016 somehow involved in this jumble. Okay, watch my Mars square conjunct Neptune video from yesterday to get more clarity on that. I'll post a link to that at the end of this video. But somewhere here, and you know, as I was getting ready to do this video, I saw the news of Ahmaud Arbery and more information coming out about him. Now, this is information that is coming out as part of a trial. So I did not do what I wanted to do, which was to share it on social media. And this Gemini-Sagittarius axis is very much about broadcasting and communication and technology. Communication. Because I thought, as incensing as the new revelations are, and as a reminder, Ahmaud Arbery was a gentleman who was going out on a jog and was gunned down by 3 people, one of whom was photographing the event. More information has occurred as part. Now, whether this information holds true, and I'm not saying this to incense anyone, it's just it's part of the trial, so it's information coming out as part of the trial, and before sharing it, I thought I'm going to wait and see what the next few days continue to bring. But it was I was like, thank you. This is what I was waiting for with regard to this. Finally, the chart of this full moon snapping into place. There's a story and there's the truth. We have the Sun and a retrograde Venus in the part of the chart that has to do with stories that we're being told, or our story, or chatter, or information, or communication. We have the full moon in the sign of truth. And we have Mars conjunct Neptune in another sign, Pisces, of spirituality and remove and the truth. Stories, deception, the way we lie to ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories that others tell us. What is truthful in these stories and what is not. What is to be revealed and what is not. That is at the heart of this full moon. For some of us, this is playing out in a quiet way. When it comes to the sign of Sagittarius, and when it comes to Jupiter, the ruler of this chart, even though he's not the final dispositor and he's influenced by all these other planets. And it's actually, one thing about Jupiter is coming up for me to warn you and tell you. Jupiter and Pluto are going to be conjunct for the second of 3 times at the end of June, and I am going to warn you that this, and again the news emerged today, coronavirus cases are on the rise, and the expansion of the virus, as I look at charts, I'm linking to this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. Started off with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction at the end of last year, Jupiter-Pluto conjunction 3 times, the first time is what brought it all to the fore in this big way in terms of news and information and dissemination. The second time at the end of June, which I feel as we're opening things up, people are out on the street a lot more. There is a spike in cases heading towards November for the 3rd and final round of Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. So just if you are living with people who are vulnerable, or if you are vulnerable yourself, this may not, my advice, consult with your medical professionals. Be careful as we head towards the end of June. I'm not seeing the cases dying down. Now, there may be healing or other things that are in work, more tests available, or vaccines or other things that are being developed. I'm going to leave that out of the equation for now, but I'm going to, since Jupiter is the ruler of this chart, I'm going to mention that as well. But somewhere this chart, this is a full moon about authenticity. And the moon, just before it goes full, opposes Venus. And it's this throwdown between what we are learning from the information that we're getting and gathering and going through and reviewing, ideally from a silent and still in a very Venus retrograde place, about our finances and our relationships, being squared off by perhaps a certain amount of deception, the lies we tell ourselves, or how we may hold other people responsible for certain actions that we're doing or we're taking that are not entirely clean. Other people's behaviors like that around us, but somewhere, this is a full moon related to our goals and around our truth and around our authenticity. When I say that Sagittarius is a sign of remove, it is ultimately a sign of remove intuition, communicating with spirit, as is Pisces. They're the two Jupiter-ruled signs, and they are playing a role here. The energies in Pisces are much more complex, have to do with loss, losing something, really connecting with spirit and acknowledging and surrendering and moving along and not resisting. And while some of that disconcerting energy is at play, this full moon in Sagittarius, opposing the sun, but most importantly opposing Venus right before it, is about, all right, based on everything that I know and understand today, as part of this Venus retrograde process that started May the 13th, has been in place since. So interesting how astrology works. As I've said, the week before April 5th and week after April 5th are important milestones, and it just came to me that Venus entered Gemini, the sign where the sun and Venus retrograde are, around April the 4th. Amazing. So, you know, what have we been looking at with regard to what it is that we value, and how has that impacted how we've been studying and looking at our relationships and our financial situation and the link between them? Where, if any place, has there been a certain amount of deception of the way we are lying to ourselves and not lying to ourselves? And what is the relationship with all of that to our authenticity and our goals and our truth? This may not be the time when we feel like we need to be fully expressed in our marriages, in our contracts, in our partnership, in whatever. But it may be a place where we are at least being asked to contend with what we value. What are the stories that we have been told? What are the stories we're telling ourselves versus the truth? And that is what this eclipse is about. Now, Mercury has entered Cancer, and the next two eclipses are the last eclipses of the Cancer-Capricorn axis. So my videos are going to become more and more about the Cancer-Capricorn eclipse. But there are a number of videos, including this one, that are about this particular eclipse that now starts to play a role till the end of 2021. And certainly continues to play a role over the next 2 weeks. So I encourage you to come back to this video and the others whenever you need to. This eclipse could be playing out for you in a relatively quiet way. There are a number of other eclipses coming up, so it's not that every eclipse hits you with the same intensity. There are millions of people. You have prominent placements in Gemini and Sagittarius, and lots more people on this planet who are going to be affected by these eclipses, each one in their own unique way, some mildly and some quietly. One of the things to look at would be, if this is relatively quiet and you're not seeing all these signs of deception play out, it may be a quiet way of looking at, what do you value? What is your truth? What relationships and financial situations do you need to evaluate? Or are you in the middle of evaluating? What is becoming clear to you? And where is it that you have possibly been telling stories to yourself, or others have been telling stories as opposed to the truth? And how does that connect you with spirituality and spirit? For some people, it's a quiet discussion with not much turmoil happening. And for some people, it's a much bigger discussion where you have pulled back the rug with Venus retrograde, brought out the magnifying glass, and are going through and looking at what it is that has been happening. My previous videos will help you with different permutations and combinations around that. All right? I'm going to end this at the 30-minute mark. Feel free to like, share this video if you found it. This is one of the important videos of the year because it has to do with the first of these eclipses. Click on the subscribe button. Please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It helps the channel grow. And if you subscribe it, consider clicking on the bell icon next to the subscribe button and click on that because it'll notify you when I do new videos. I'm so glad that this has been a relatively undistracted outdoor video. And my contact information is in the subject area. So if you would like to contact me to consider to ask about rates for readings, or you'd like to make you an easy to read version of your chart that will tell you which signs are in what houses and what they stand for, you can inquire about that as well. You'll need to know your birth time for that. But do not send me your birth time until we actually make contact, and please, you know the rates and you know if you want to move forward or not, okay? I don't want to collect personal information unnecessarily. All right, over and out. I'm going to move on to the Cancer Capricorn axis, but in the meantime, sit with this eclipse, certainly over the next 24 hours, over the next 2 weeks, and consider what is authentic, what you value, what is important to you. Consider the stories that you're telling yourself and that we're being told. Consider where we're getting information. Consider where you are getting information. Consider where you're giving information and what information you're giving yourself. And consider with Mars conjunct Neptune, I said this yesterday, I'll say it again, even if it's information that resonates with what you believe, and I mean this on a macro political level and a personal level, consider the intent of who is providing that information to you and whether you know who they are or whether they are masquerading as a friend and giving you information that corroborates or is very much aligned with how you believe politically, but could be run by some sort of foreign agency somewhere that is just trying to sow discontent, ultimately. All of this information, stories, broadcasting your truth, extraordinarily magnified at this time. So nothing wrong with sitting down. You're not going to have a choice anyway. You're going to be sitting down and thinking about what is it that your fundamental truth is as opposed to stories that are out there. And the energy will remain active for another 2 weeks. Okay, over and out.